Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunworks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
We're back on another episode of Long Range Pursuit Podcast. This is our Product Insights mini-series, and we're talking ammo today. I think I've got this entitled, What Makes, or How to Make Great Ammo, or What Makes Great Ammo. And, you know, Gunworks, everybody looks at Gunworks as a rifle manufacturer, right? We do a lot more than just build guns. Ammo is one of those things, but I think understanding why that is, why we don't just focus on, you go to business school, it's core competencies and focusing on the one thing that you're good at. Why do we expend so much time and effort and energy into building ammunition when we could just tell guys to go buy a box of this or that off of the shelf and stick it in their gun, rather than, we have to have a whole department, a whole room, a whole space, all the inventory that we store. Like it's a big lift and a big stress on the business to run an ammunition department if we didn't have to, right? And Josh, feel free to weigh in, but I think to me what it really comes back to is Gunworks positions ourselves as 1,000 yards out of the box performance for rifles, right? It's our tagline. It's kind of a marketing thing. But when you're building rifles for long range and that need out of the box performance, you just have to take control of the quality and the specifications and the performance of that ammunition, because if you leave yourself open to other ammunition sources kind of determining your destiny there, it doesn't work out. And we've tried that before and learned our lesson.
Yeah. Like for me, long range precision it's not any one thing, it's the whole system. And I think that's kind of our secret. The secret sauce of what we have going on is we've got the system, we've got the ammo, everything's paired together, right? When it comes to precision, we attribute it to a few things. You got your rifle, which consists of your barrel, your action, and your stock. Then you have your optic on top, and then you have your ammo, right? Yeah. I think for the kind of the context of this podcast, I think we'll mainly focus on rifle, ammo, and optic, right? And really at the end of the day, 95% of what's going on, it's rifle and ammo, right? So, I mean, we can probably do a whole podcast on and dive into the rabbit holes of, rifle systems, the nuances there, and we'll kind of focus on ammo for today's topic. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we're doing is we're pairing that rifle with the ammo, the optic on top, everything. We're controlling the quality start to finish. And that's really kind of the secret sauce of what we have going on.
I mean, when the rifles are always the kind of exciting, sexy, fun piece of it, right? So I think it's easy to kind of overlook the ammunition side of it, but literally in a long-range system, you can't have one without the other, right? And they have to work together well. One of the big misnomers that I see guys that have kind of maybe seen Gunworks or familiar with, our out-of-the-box systems, a lot of guys assume that when we build a gun that we're building a load for that gun. And so we're going and saying, well, that gun took, 68.7 grains, and that gun took 68.8 grains, and that gun took whatever. It's actually kind of the other way around. And this is kind of funny, but when we think about it, it actually makes sense. And you give me your insight, your perspective here, but it's almost more like we build the guns around the ammo than we build the ammo around the guns. We have a standardized load that we build for our rifle systems, right? And all of our rifles shoot that standard load. Now, some instances, there might be a this or that option, but essentially it's a standard load that everything shoots. And if you think about it, that's really, really difficult. I'll put that out there, that it's generally relatively easy to go find a load that shoots in your gun. But to go find a load that shoots in thousands of guns, now we're in the unique position where we're doing everything CNC, we're able to control tolerances and consistency from rifle to rifle to rifle to probably a degree that almost nobody else can. And that's probably what contributes to us being able to have a standard load that shoots in all of our rifle systems.
Yeah, that is the most challenging part of what we're doing is making it work over and over again across all calibers, all barrels, all barrel lengths.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, and really you have to. The most critical part is the load development itself, that you are circling back and you're getting, leaving no stone unturned along the whole process.
Right.
You're optimizing every single variable that you can, that you have time or the ability to measure, really is what it comes down to. So that's definitely something that we strive for in the load development process.
Yeah.
So I guess we can kind of start. Let's touch on rifle and ammo and how those two work together.
Yeah.
In the scientific world, I guess that all comes down to internal ballistics and exterior ballistics. So little definition there. You have internal ballistics, that is basically the science that encompasses from the trigger sear drops all the way until your bullet leaves the crown of the muzzle, right? So the biggest things that are going into that is your primer ignition, how the powder inside your case begins to burn, and then when your case is expanding, when your peak pressure is happening,
right?
What the bullet is doing in kind of when it's engraving into the rifling,
spinning up, and
then you kind of get into
accelerating on the bore.
There's a little bit of a gray area in you have twist rate, and then that finite point in which your bullet is leaving the muzzle. That transitions you to your exterior ballistics. Generally with exterior ballistics, like that is down to the bullet, how it's designed and how it's manufactured. But there's that little bit of gray area where you have your gyroscopic stability in the barrel. So that's mainly, is your twist rate effectively spinning the bullet fast enough to stabilize it as soon as it leaves.
Right.
And then what that's doing is, if your bullet is effectively stable, it is going to basically set that bullet up to have good flight, to where it's going to achieve the BC that it's designed for. So you kind of have this little trade-off, is your rifle system is there to provide consistency, and then tee that bullet up to do what it's designed for. And then after it's left the rifle, then you're just at the laws of picture
at that point.
Then you're at the laws of physics and kind of how that bullet is designed and the QC that went into that bullet. So when we start talking about kind of what makes great ammo, right? I always try to break it down into what are we trying to achieve, right? You have functional requirements, you have performance requirements, and then safety requirements. So as far as function goes, I mean, we have to load this case. It has to fit in a magazine box, and it has to go from the box up to the chamber, right? So you start looking at, that's when you start getting into your dimensional aspects of the cartridge.
Right.
And then where, it's going to fit in the chamber. It's going to not hang up on anything or stovepipe or jam or anything like that. And then,
generally you're wanting to load those bullets relatively close to the lance, and that's how a lot of guys achieve precision. It's not always the case, but very often precision ammo is starting relatively close to the lance in a rifle system.
Yep.
And there's, we've been through this recently. You just spent 2 months working on some load development stuff, and that's a challenge when you're sometimes restricted by magazine length, and you're choosing a bullet that you want to load in a given cartridge. You have an action length to deal with, and now you have a chamber and a throat length that you're trying to match up. And so sometimes, depending on the bullet design and the case design and the system that you're running it in, are you able to get that bullet out close enough to the lance and still fit that bullet in the magazine and feed well? And sometimes that's a challenge. And guys that go, start putting rifles together, they send it off to a gunsmith, and maybe he's got this reamer, and you want to run this bullet, and that reamer was designed more for a different bullet. It's get kind of wonky.
Yeah. I mean, the big challenge there is you have cases that you're trying to load for that are 100 years old.
Yeah.
Bullets have changed a lot in their design and their efficiency. They've been optimized over the last 100 years or 75 years. And over time, bullets have gotten a lot longer. Pretty much all VLD bullets have a boat tail on them now, so which is going to help with that just your overall design of the bullet and the BC and how it's going to interact. But as they've gotten longer, a lot of those, throat lengths in your chamber are shorter, and you have to seat that bullet a lot further in. Or if you're trying to seat it out a lot longer, that's when you start running into those mag box issues.
Yeah.
So
300 PRCs versus 300 Win Mag would be maybe a perfect case in point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Very traditional 300 Win Mag design, a relatively long case. A lot of guys, optimizing or hand loading, putting big heavy bullets in it, but they're running into case length issues very, very often.
Yep.
Right. Where the 300 PRC, if you look at the case design, more modern case design, the case is significantly shortened, but it's made to load a 225 grain bullet rather than like a 180 grain bullet.
Yep.
Same caliber.
Yep.
Right. So you get all this ballistic performance out of the higher BC bullet that you're running, but also better case design. They've designed that case specifically to fit in a long action with longer bullets.
Yeah. Let's see. So let's talk about chamber anatomy just for a quick second, because we're going to throw out some terms that not everybody's probably going to know. So the first one that I would start with is headspace. That is the primary driver to getting your cartridge or your case to fit inside the chamber. And headspace is mainly a measurement from your bolt face or the head of the cartridge to the shoulder. And it's a controlled dimension by SAMI that standardizes just cartridge design. And basically it's a dimension from the head of the case to the center of the shoulder, roughly. And they kind of, what they do is they set on most Magnum cartridges, it's a 0.420 diameter. And if you take that perfect 0.420 circle and you slide it over the shoulder of the case, wherever it stops, that's the measurement you're going to take on there. So headspace is going to be the main driver to make stuff fit in your chamber so that you can effectively close your bolt and chamber that round. Outside of that, you get into seating depth, which is just how far the bullet is seated into the cartridge. And then you have bullet jump, which is basically the distance at which the bullet from when it leaves the cartridge to when it engraves into the rifling.
Right.
Kind of a few terms there. You do get into a little bit more into the weeds a little bit with your case neck. We'll talk about neck tension here in a bit, but that's mainly the amount of interference that goes, that's hugging the bullet pretty much in the mouth of the case. So you want to have enough tension to hold the bullet in there, but not so loose that it'll, the bullet can easily be moved or pressed in. And then you also want to have enough clearance on the chamber that your case neck can expand to effectively let the bullet go.
Right.
As you go. So those are a few of the main things that kind of dive into the functional requirements. Once you kind of get a step past that, we've got a bullet that fits in the chamber. Now, what do we want it to do, right? So when you start looking at that, we're looking for mainly velocity, kinetic energy, start getting into terminal ballistics downrange. But ultimately we're looking for the good group size, low dispersion, and then also low extreme spreads. Yeah. That kind of falls into that external ballistics. If you have, these extreme spreads, that can cause misses downrange. Yeah. So controlling that at a high level is also very critical.
Right.
And then anything to add up to performance requirements?
No, I think the biggest thing is just, to start out. I mean, if we're talking about building good ammo, you need to start with good components and not just quality components, but also the right components for the application. Yeah. And so, I think this almost goes without saying, but, vastly different approaches. If you were loading for a dangerous game in Africa, you're probably going to be loading a big, heavy monolithic or a bullet that's going to hold together and create a lot of penetration. If you're doing long-range Western hunting, and you might be taking shots out to 1,000 yards, you want to be choosing a bullet that that is going to be reliably expanding on it, given your retained velocity downrange. A lot of guys talk about kinetic energy, and realistically, at the end of the day, the energy doesn't really matter that much as long as your bullet is sized right for the game that you're shooting, and you're getting good expansion with that bullet, and good shot placement.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Terminal ballistics, I would say it's a relatively not misunderstood, but not understood very well.
Yeah.
The science of it. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a function of energy, and then also your ability to incapacitate an animal, right? Is really what you're kind of going for there. And I mean, that's a deep subject that could be for a different podcast. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to suit all of your components to suit the application, the hunt you're going on, or whatever you're trying to do. But I think we can all agree that consistency is the key there, right? And that's something I kind of wanted to really, for each specific component, kind of dive into some of the
what makes that
specifics.
consistent.
Yeah, so
I agree.
So we could start with powder. Powder is mainly, we could back up and kind of talk manufacturing it. I read some books recently, and I was kind of fascinated by how they make gunpowder and how long ago it was actually made. Like,
sure,
it was like in the late 1800s, like when they came out with the smokeless powders.
Powders, really?
Yeah, and it's you get into like what the Chinese were doing. Like, I think it was like in the 1700s that they were first coming out with gunpowder, and
probably even farther than that. Yeah, a long time ago. But
the history goes way back.
But the nitrocellulose-based powders are even back to the 1800s, huh?
Yeah, they are. Yep, it's it was kind of around that World War I time frame that they came out with the IMR powders, the improved military rifle powders. So I just thought it was interesting. With powder, it's mainly made of wood pulp, pretty much. It's cellulose, and they basically they soak it in nitric acid, and then that's what gives it the flammability, and then they give it these chemical burn inhibitors,
like retardant to actually control the burn rate, and whatever else.
But they basically get this nitric acid into the wood pulp, and then it's kind of kneaded into almost a dough almost, and then they throw it and they extrude the powder. For most common powders are extruded, and they mainly just put it through a plate, and they have a little thing that chops it at the
like making noodles or
pretty much
like that.
that's pretty much what it is.
Huh.
So they add chemicals to the process to control burn rate, but burn rate is really, it's defined by how much surface area do you have. So it's a geometric a function of the geometry of your powder, right? So it's diameter, length, all of that. But it's also determined by that chemical makeup, and that's where you get these fast burns and slow burns is kind of the combination of the two. I'd say the biggest thing we want to pay attention to with powder is that you're kind of staying within those safe pressure and velocity standards. So, but case fill capacity, kind of wanted to touch on that you are filling your case sufficiently to kind of limit your extreme spreads. Because really what happens is if you have a lower case fill capacity, you have more air in front of the powder. And then you also have, you're not filling up that volume as much. So there's going to be different ways the powder can lay inside the cartridge.
Inside that case differently, and then you have different exposure.
Yeah. I've actually read some studies with this where some guys are shooting on flat land, which that's most of your practice, right? You're shooting at a range on flat land. And then as soon as you start, doing your vertical stuff up and down, that powder's kind of rolling around in there.
So in theory, getting closer to a maximum case fill, 95%, 100% case fill, or whatever, you're going to get more reliable, repeatable ignition on that powder.
Exactly. And you're mainly going to see that in
spreads. Yeah,
your spreads. It's just going to, the ignition of the powder and how it burns is going to be more consistent. So for bullets, the big one there is you're selecting that weight for the game that you're going for. You're kind of looking at some of the powder data out there on trying to target a velocity. And then really at the end of the day, like high BC is better, right? Within reason. And really what you're kind of trying to attack there is wind drift. That's the biggest factor there, because that's the most uncontrolled variable in the whole process, I would say, as far as exterior ballistics go. But at the end of the day, that you're looking for that BC, and then I think when it comes to quality and consistency, we're looking for center of gravity consistency as well. So Basically what that is your bullet has a natural center of gravity, and you have a rotational axis of the bullet. If you're off of that rotational axis a little bit, that can cause some pretty bad stability issues. And really where that'll manifest itself is in if you have poor bonding of the lead core to the jacket,
Right.
or you have jacket thickness variances where the jacket might be just a little bit thicker on one side than the other side. It'll cause that bullet to essentially not rotate efficiently through the air, and that'll affect your BC.
Right. And your cup and core, boat tail bullets, kind of what most of your traditional, or I would say modern, long range hunting bullets are designed in. We've been running burger bullets in most of our stuff for a long, long time, and had fantastic luck with those bullets as far as precision and terminal performance. We've run a lot of Hornady bullets over the years, and they're fantastic bullets. The ballistic tips are great for reliable expansion. But, and then you start looking at some of the monolithic bullets, and, I've not looked into science. I assume a turned copper bullet is probably just about as perfectly balanced as you could expect. Although it seems like the cup and core bullets do really well, even though you'd expect some variability in that just inherent process of drawing a piece of copper around a lead core. But they've always done well. I don't know if you've looked into any of the science.
Man, everything I've looked at, the two-piece bullets have come a long ways.
Yeah,
and they've a lot of these manufacturers have really got that dialed in really well. The place I get is, yes, I would say as far as center of gravity goes, you're going to be a little better off with a one material on your bullet. But I mean, we get plenty of good success.
The results still lie with the cup and core bullets.
Yeah, exactly. So they've come a long ways. I mean, it's just there's that one more variable that you're adding into it that could go wrong. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot we can do about that. We're kind of at the mercy of the manufacturers there, but they do a great job. I've personally never ran into something like that.
Yeah.
So next would be brass. I mean, the biggest factors there is your dimensional stuff, your headspace, neck diameter, things like that. We can kind of get into things we do in a bit to size the brass and stuff like that. But and then after that, it's mainly lot to lot variances that we have to control, and then material properties. And really, I think the rubber meets the road with that neck tension. And what force is acting on the bullet when it's being pressed in there. And then the last one would be primers. Biggest effect those are going to have is just extreme spreads. Are you selecting a powder or a primer that effectively can ignite that powder charge in the case? You get into like small cartridges, you're going to be looking at small rifle primers. You step it up to some of these short action magnums, you're going to be in large rifle primers. And then there's some gray area and some overlap in there on stepping up to that large rifle magnum primer. But generally, the long action cartridges are going to take the magnum primer. Okay, we've talked about spreads a couple times. I was kind of thinking I want to really touch on that and explain the importance of it, right?
At some point I want to maybe just touch on load development as well. And I don't know where that fits in the whole process. But I think landing on a load specification and the process to get there, it's maybe not necessarily how you make good ammo, but you're never going to get good ammo unless you have the right recipe for your rifle, right? I don't know, maybe we can talk just through a little bit of what the process there. The funny thing is if there's 1 million reloaders out there, there's probably 1 million ways to do that, to develop a load. We've been through that process here recently quite a bit. We've learned some things. I don't know that we have all the answers. I mean, I think, I was thinking through this the other day, and you probably have some more engineering speak ways to explain this, but rifle systems in general, I've seen people, we've even done it here, where sometimes you're just chasing your tail, trying to trying to find that one little culprit that, for some reason, this isn't quite doing what I want it to. Let's try this, let's change that. And it sure would be nice in a perfect world where you just had this algorithmic formula. You just run through it and you say, okay, we'll check this, do this, and you come out with a perfect recipe at the end of the day.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, nobody has found that. We certainly haven't cracked that egg. Although I think we've learned a lot of things in the last couple of months.
I don't think it's physically possible.
Well, and what I'm getting at is I think there are so many variables involved.
Yep.
I mean, it would be interesting just to sit down and try to count how many variables there are, but
hundreds of thousands, I would bet.
Literally, and stacked on top of with interconnected, all influencing each other all at once, right? So I guess that's what I'm getting at is, in theory, philosophically, if you built 2 identical rifle systems and 2 identical bullets in every way, shape, and form and fire them at the same time, they should do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
But when you get a 1/10 of a thousandth variance here and a 1,000th variance there and a 1/10 of a thousandth there, and they all start working together, they cascade. And I think it's essentially like an entropic system, right? There's probably some kind of engineering speak there, but it's like entropy, right? It's like everything just kind of blows into disarray.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you've got here is a system with so many variables that cannot be controlled exactly, even though we're controlling some things down to the 1/10 of the thousandth of an inch.
Yeah.
That there's just no way to.
Yeah. With all the variables, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
That's probably a lesson that I've learned recently in load development.
Yeah.
But really easy to get lost in the weeds. And, I always go back to the basics of, what are we trying to, what are the requirements? What are we trying to achieve here? But generally, to kind of limit how much you get lost or, smoke and mirrors is what I always think of.
Yeah.
Is you are basically changing one variable at a time.
Sure.
Because if you change multiple variables at a time, you don't know what
Exactly
caused you to step in the right or the wrong direction, right? So, keeping the one variable at a time is a really good method. But then also is looking for trends is, really we start targeting a velocity, right? Like generally we've ran off of the same velocities, as far as long as we've been around, because we've developed the velocity at a pressure that worked well. And then we've got BDC turrets. So we're always trying to match that velocity. So, for us, we have a target velocity that we're trying to hit, and we start trying different powders, different charges. You're kind of, testing the scale, in increments, like an increment test of powder, trying to look for trends in the velocity of the powder, where we're trying to funnel into that velocity. And then once you get to the velocity you're looking for, then that's when we start looking at spreads. We start looking at group size, things like that, changing that one variable at a time. I changed variable A and my extreme spreads got worse. Okay, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go the other way.
Right.
We're going to start looking at, a couple of these different things kind of within that window of velocity that we're trying to target.
Sure.
Right. So that's the biggest one, is just when you start, like, map your group size, map your speed, map your spreads, and just keep that data. Like, I keep a spreadsheet going.
Yeah.
On every barrel that we test that we're doing load development on. Like, I get my round, that way I have my round count. I've got everything I need right there. And then I can go back and reference that data. If I want to mine that out, I can go plot it. And, really a graph can, paint a really apparent picture of what's going on. And
we have the luxury of, being able to go burn a couple hundred rounds to develop a load for that we know that we're going to be using across all of the rifle systems. 1,000 rounds, right? I mean, you look at 300 PRC project we just completed. There's probably a couple thousand rounds that were burned in the process there. Yeah. Most guys at home don't have that luxury because they're burning out a barrel, but by the time, and a lot of components to get there, and so you try to kind of simplify that process a little bit. I've been working a little bit on kind of a framework or process, trying to experiment with it and confirm whether it's going to work for us or not. But, I think looking at the magnitude of impact each of these variables have and learning that some things just really don't make a lot of difference, and some things make big differences.
Mm-hmm.
And focusing on the big rocks first, and then
Yep.
fine tuning with the little rocks at the end, I think is one important approach. And I think with a little bit of work and effort, it becomes pretty apparent. I think guys that have been doing this for years have kind of naturally learned this, that, some of your component selections are by far the biggest impact on the effect of a load. You look at your powder charge, once you've got a powder selected, your powder charge is a major player in the performance of a load. You get down to the end and you're looking at run out and neck tension and seating depth is probably somewhere in between there. But I think there is this natural flow of magnitude that you can follow to start granular and work down.
Yeah, that's generally how we approach it, right? Is powder selection and charge weight. I mean, that's going to be your pressure, which is going to be kind of your input into the system. That's your lug load and how much barrel vibration you're going to have in the system. And then it's also going to drive your velocity, and just trying to find that sweet spot, through both the charge and the type.
Right.
And then on top of that is bullets, and what bullet you've selected. There might be one that works a little bit better, but kind of getting those core systems down in powder charge, bullet selection, and primer selection. Once you've got kind of something working there, that's when it's time to start fine tuning and say, okay, I'm gonna seat the bullet 20 off the lands, then I'm gonna seat it 40, 60, 80, 100. See if I can find that. Look for that trend. In your jump, and then we're gonna look at neck tension in there. Like that's kind of we found neck tension is very important, and it varies on caliber and bullet size and everything like that. And that's where we've kind of taken the initiative, and we've got some custom tooling that we use so that we can control
that
neck tension at a very high level. But yeah, you're right. Kind of at the end, that's when you circle back and you start getting those low hanging fruit, if you will, around those last little gains. But it's easy to get lost in the weeds kind of on the front end, with all those little variables that you might think are affecting it on the back end. But get that good foundation before you start putting your walls up, if you will.
Right. One last thought that just came to mind that I think is worth mentioning is, I think many of us are guilty of this, is understanding the statistical significance of what we're seeing when we're doing load development. And I think if we were all honest with ourselves, I mean, it's been a long time since statistics courses in school, but so many of us tend to go shoot a 3 round group, or if we're being really aggressive, we're shooting a 5 round group and saying, that looks good, right? You see guys posting online, they shot five round groups with a half grain increment, whatever else. Which group do you think I should, which load do you think I should choose? I think if you looked at it and analyzed it statistically, one group per each charge weight is telling you absolutely nothing. Right. So I think I'm not going to give you exactly what those numbers are to achieve your statistical significance in your sample size, but I think that is something that all of us need to be reminded of, is that, a group does not represent enough statistical significance to really tell us much.
No, it doesn't. It can certainly suggest tendencies, but I think, group size is really critical, right? I think the 5 round groups is your minimum. I mean, there's lots of articles and podcasts out there talking about what is, statistically significant. And, most of those guys fall back onto 5 rounds minimum. You're doing 10, that's pretty good. I mean, if you really want a statistically significant sample size, you're looking at 20 or 30 rounds.
Sure.
So that's, 4 or 5 shot groups that you're looking for in there. And that's, I always like to do that on the very tail end, right? We're kind of shooting one group looking at, are we stepping in the right direction, or are we going backwards?
Right.
And you're slowly kind of, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of approach, but you're making forward progress, and then at the end you're dialing it down to your final stuff, and then am I shooting consistently? Are my spreads staying within what we're trying to achieve? Are my group sizes
Right.
And as far as group size goes, I mean, there's the repeatability group to group to group is, on some rifles, it's over a quarter minute, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if you have a half-minute gun, you're going to shoot some quarter-minute groups. You're going to shoot some three-quarter-minute groups. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference between a quarter-minute group and a three-quarter-minute group. And trust me, I've been there. Like, when you shoot that quarter-minute group, like, you want to just, like, sink your claws into that, latch onto it.
Don't touch anything, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, we're looking for those tendencies and those trends. I mean, just because you shot 1 1/4-inch group doesn't mean it's going to do it again and again and again. And that's the goal that you're looking for, is, that ultimate consistency.
Yeah.
Throughout. So, okay, spreads. I crunched some numbers on spreads just to kind of solidify how important they are. I just took a 300 PRC.
Yeah.
So that's a big bullet. It's got a pretty high BC. So, these some of this data I'm about to share is smaller than a lot of these smaller calibers that have lower BCs.
Right. This is basically best case scenario then at this point.
Pretty much. So I just took a generic 300 PRC profile, and I input a 40-foot extreme spread. So that's basically your average plus 20 feet a second minus 20 feet a second. So that's a 40-foot overall spread, right? So our current 300 PRC load is going roughly 2960. So you're going from 2940 to 2980. Just looking at the vertical correction on that, basically the 2940 was 23.3 minutes of correction, and the 2980 was 22.5 minutes of correction. So there's 0.8.
At 1,000 yards.
That's at 1,000 yards. So there's 0.8 MOA of difference there.
Of vertical dispersion. Theoretically.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, at 1,000 yards, that's what, 8.5 inches of just, and that's
significant.
That's significant, and that's stuff we can't really control, right? That's just the laws of physics.
Yeah, and then you
once it leaves the muzzle,
it's all your error stacked on top of that, right? You run a Monte Carlo analysis and look at your actual hit rate probability.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're losing a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, you put on, but the dispersion factor of that, like, you can get to a minute really quick, and we just talked about 2 variables right there, and all of a sudden we're at 1 MOA.
Yeah.
So it's, and we've talked about the stack up of variables. It's all about, for me, is just going back to sound practices, both in the manufacturing of the components and everything, because you can't physically control every single variable that goes into it.
Right.
So you just fall back onto the basics and execute them well. And you might not necessarily make a perfect shooting rifle that way, but at least you're eliminating hundreds of questions that might go, well, was it the primer seating depth on this one, or was it all these different things that you can go into. So I just wanted to touch on that, and just to kind of get the significance of it. So I guess we can start talking about how to make ammo.
Some of the nuts and bolts of the actual loading process.
Yeah, exactly.
Ammo. Yeah.
So I mean, kind of a brief overview of a generic process, is loosely how we do it as well, is our headspace. We talked about that. That's since we're using brand new brass in all of our ammo, we can't really set the headspace. It's kind of set from the manufacturer. That being said, we are keeping it within SAMI specs, right?
Yeah.
And we're controlling that and inspecting it at a very high level. If it's out of what we want, then we will kick that out.
Right.
But headspace is generally set with either a shoulder bushing or a full-length sizing die in the process. Generally, what we do with our brass is kind of set it at a maximum. We have a bushing in there at the maximum length, so it'll guarantee that round will chamber every single time in our chambers. So basically, when we do that, we'll set the neck diameter and make sure the shoulder's in the right location. And then, I touched on some of the tooling we use. We basically use a mandrel that sets the ID of the case. And that's something you really dive into in the process, is testing. I've made mandrels that are basically give 1 thou of neck tension, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to like 6 or 7 thousandths.
Yeah.
Just so we can, evaluate where the best spot is in the process. So, we'll make our own tooling for that just so we can get that at the right size. We've talked about, powder selection and charge weight.
Right.
We'll dive into that. And then, we have some very high quality scales that we use to meter that weight, and then put the powder in, and then we use micrometer seating dies to seat the bullet. I would say not all seating dies are created equal. So that's where buying some of those better components are gonna go a long ways to the run out of the bullet and getting the concentricity correct throughout the process, things like that. A lot of that just comes down to the seating stem, and how it engages the bullet, how it locates the brass cartridge underneath, and having the micrometer feature makes it really easy to control that seating depth to the thousandth of an inch.
Yeah. Going into powder charges, assuming we've done all the load development process, we've selected an optimal powder charge for this load. I think you'll see that the kind of common thread throughout is consistency. What's your thought on how precise you need to be with a powder charge? We're using really, really high end, fancy scales and auto tricklers, whole banks of them out here. I mean, essentially Gunworks ammo is hand loaded like the best hand loaders are loading out there.
Yeah.
Very, very different approach to building ammunition versus commercial ammunition versus most mass produced ammunitions out there that are probably, volumetric charges and whatever else. But how precise do you really think you need to be? I mean, these scales out here will measure down to the 100th of a grain.
Yeah.
Right.
I would attribute it. I think that's a rabbit hole that's easy to get caught up in. Here's one that really kind of brought it full circle for me is I was running basically an increment test where I did 75, 76, 77, 78, 79 grains.
Yeah.
And I shot a .62 inch group.
Across that.
Yeah, across that whole range, right?
And here's a funny thing. I saw the exact same thing working on a 22 Creedmoor load last week where, I saw 0.3 inch groups with 3 grains of spread.
Yep.
Shot with rounds loaded throughout that group.
Yeah.
Right. Now that's not always going to be the case. But when I think that goes to show that if you've selected the right components and you've stacked the cards in your favor ahead upstream from there, then sometimes you're essentially stacking the cards in your favor in that the charge weight is not as important as it could be otherwise. Right.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, it's so as far as dispersion goes, which is what I think a lot of people get there on charge weight, you're going to have vertical dispersion if it's off like that. That was a big paradigm shift for me.
Yeah.
I mean, but don't take that as like your spreads, like in that 5/8 inch group that I just mentioned, like my spreads were 150 feet. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, it is important.
I think my takeaway would be, if you can control your charge weights down to, I don't know, 0.1 plus or minus 0.1, 0.2 grains, you're probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I say, these scales out here will measure down to the 100th, but I think generally speaking, I'm loading with like Charge Masters at home and they'll only go down to 0.1 grains.
Yep.
But about 2 kernels of powder in the big extruded powders is usually 0.1 grains. 2 to 3, I think has been my observation. So you're not going to be measuring down to the kernel of powder anyway.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, that's very true. So it's important, but mainly from an extreme spread standpoint is getting very consistent. But I go back to that case fill capacity. Like I was talking, there's so many more variables that go into just that charge weight. So it's kind of one of those things, control it to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
But don't get lost in the weeds on, when I first started reloading, I had some tweezers and I was like,
pull out a grain.
Yeah, I was pulling out 1 kernel at a time until I was like there. I was just, I don't know. It just, in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter as much as one would think.
Sure.
So, I mean, be careful with it. Get your spreads down, mainly in the interest of extreme spreads. So, so we have, we've gone through the whole process. I mean, we've got the neck size right. We've got powder in the cartridge, and then we're seating the bullet, right? And that's one thing where if you've done your jump testing, your bullet seating depth is not gonna, it's not as critical as one would think. I mean, pay attention to it. Consistency is still king. But I always found myself when I first started reloading too, is measuring every single round and then, dialing at a thou here or there and
Right.
trying to just like make sure they're all exactly the same. And I was like, I'm probably doing more harm in the process than good by like constantly modifying my tools and my tool head and all that. Like I just set it up to where you get some good rounds and then just go to town. That's really what we do here.
Yeah.
Proof it out and we've set up a pretty robust process on how to qualify a load. Where we kind of take it from a single stage press to our progressive press that we use in production. But we're testing the ammo from each, and we're running an LRIP, a limited run in production, where we basically take the ammo off the press, and then we're shooting it in a bunch of different guns, making sure we didn't have any variables change at a very high level. And usually through that, we're through a couple hundred rounds and through a couple, a dozen or so or more rifles.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say we've got a lot of confidence that we've set it all up.
For sure.
So, what else? I mean, we've pretty much talked through the whole process there.
Yeah, I mean, like say, I think there's, you could go into the weeds as far as you want to go on this topic. And, I think guys listening, if you want to hear more about reloading, give us a shout. There's been some discussion, maybe doing a little reloading mini series, where we could dive into some of the more specific topics and in a little bit more systematic way. But, I think to me, the biggest thing here is consistency, right? And, I guess if I could go back and reiterate and kind of look at a process, my thought process here on a very, very high level would be, start with quality components, basically stack the cards in your favor ahead of time, right? Start with quality components. You're selecting components that are for the purpose that you need and that are of the reliability and the quality and the maybe reputation commensurate with the expectations you have for the load, right? And I think part of that goes with the host rifle. It's like if your host rifle's a turd, you're not helping yourself out, right?
Exactly.
And that's the one thing that I've learned is having only in recent years gone from the factory gun mentality to the custom rifle mentality is how much easier it is to load for a custom rifle. Generally, a well-built custom rifle.
Yeah.
It's night and day difference.
Yeah.
Generally, I could get just about any factory gun to shoot, but it took a lot of work sometimes, right? Sometimes it just works right out the bat with a higher end rifle. So stack the cards in your favor. Start with quality components. Do that load development to determine what that load, that specification,
the combination of
components that fits your rifle and is going to work for what you need. And then I think it is developing a process and consistency in how you're doing things to achieve consistent dimensions and specifications in that final load product, and you're going to be successful. That's kind of, to me, that's kind of 3-step process there. And
that's my biggest thing is there's so much smoke and mirrors and rabbit holes you can go down, and you can really waste a lot of time and money doing it.
Yeah.
And I've really come to realize people make reloading hard. Like you were saying, focus on the basics, quality components, finding the right combo. Yeah. And for me, it's don't lose sight of the big picture, what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And in most applications, you're looking for precision, and that's manifests itself in dispersion, your group size, and your extreme spreads.
Yeah. Like
those are the two golden eggs you're trying to find there. You can find that combination that gets you to those two things. You're going to be miles ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
And it's just focus on the basics and don't get lost in the weeds. That's really where I get with it.
And here's the other thing is, this sounds maybe kind of contrary to what we've been talked about, but don't get caught up chasing that 1/4 inch group. If we were bench rest shooters, maybe it would be a different story, but for hunting, even for long range hunting, if you're a good bit under a minute reliably with a rifle system, you're plenty good for shooting to, hunting to 1,000 yards.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd be better served putting that effort into practicing a little bit more versus turning a half-inch group into a quarter-inch group.
Yeah.
Just my take. None of us, at least I speak for myself, definitely not a quarter-minute shooter in the field. When my heart's pumping and there's a big critter standing on the
Nobody
side,
is.
right?
Nobody is.
Yeah.
I've always found that interesting. It's almost human nature to chase that one whole
At the end of
group.
the day, we're perfectionists. Like we want to chase perfection and precision, and like that's a noble cause. But I think losing sight of the big picture and focusing on something when there are other gains to be had with those efforts is at least worthy of considering.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, thanks for jumping on today, Josh. Hopefully that was insightful for guys. We tried not to get too into the weeds on things. I think this is kind of a high level, just some things to consider on how to, what makes good ammo.
Yeah.
And, I think we'll probably dive in a little bit more onto some reloading topics here in the future. So,
yeah, I think so. And as Landon said, we're going to try to do kind of a mini series of breaking it down a little deeper on maybe the rifle system, and then break it down into subsets of stock and action and barrel.
Sure.
And try to really do that, because it really is the whole system. And, like I mentioned earlier, it's almost half and half, half ammo, half rifle. It's just that harmony of both,
Exactly.
You throw the optic in there. There can be some things there, but, everything's important when it comes down to it, but it's finding that good combination of the holistic system that gets you to where you want to be.
All right. Cool. Guys, if you got any specific questions on these topics, shoot us over an email I think it's podcast@gunworks.com, and we'll try and address those in future episodes.
Yep.
Cool.
Great. All right. Until next time.
Until next time.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram, or send us an email to podcast@gunworks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunworks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.